Join me as I dive into some of the most dangerous secrets I've ever shared and see if I can make it out alive. On April 6, 2009, near Bridgen in South Wales, a truck driver pulled over to the shoulder of National Road 48, just a few yards from the highway, at the bottom of a small ravine. He noticed an old suitcase partially concealed by tall grass. The unusual placement and shape of the suitcase sparked his curiosity. Deciding to inspect it, he unzipped the bag and was horrified to find a human hand. Shocked by the discovery, the driver immediately contacted emergency services. Kirsty Wilkinson was born on June 19, 1984 in Century, England. Her parents, David and Catherine Wilkinson, were already raising two daughters, Kirsty's older sisters, Sonia and Haley. The family enjoyed a close-knit atmosphere, fostering a sense of love and support among all members. Catherine shared an especially warm and trusting relationship with Kirsty. When Kirsty turned 14, the family moved to Bridgen, South Wales. This marked a turning point in her life. The move coincided with her teenage years, introducing new social and emotional challenges. At her new school, Kirsty quickly drew attention for her striking appearance and confident demeanor. Inspired by celebrities she saw in magazines, she began dreaming of a career in modeling. She imagined herself immersed in the world of fashion, surrounded by the spotlight and camera flashes. However, the reality proved more challenging. The modeling industry was highly competitive, and Kirsty struggled to establish a full-fledged career. Her work was limited to occasional amateur photo shoots, which brought little financial stability. Despite this, Kirsty displayed a strong sense of independence. Taking on various part-time jobs from a young age, she worked as a waitress, cashier, and even cleaned houses to avoid relying on her parents financially. At 17, Kirsty's circumstances changed dramatically, facing mounting expenses. She began working at an establishment in Bridgen known for its nightlife and adult entertainment. For Kirsty, this was less of a choice and more of a necessity. She kept this aspect of her life a secret from her family, fearing their judgment. To her mother and sisters, she claimed to work as an administrator for a local business, using the pseudonym Megan to protect her identity. Kirsty tried to separate this part of her life from the rest of her world. The financial benefits of her new job were significant. She was able to afford her own apartment, cover personal expenses, and even save some of her earnings. However, Kirsty did not take pride in her work. The constant fear of exposure weighed heavily on her, and she struggled with feelings of shame and inner conflict. She longed for a way to leave that chapter of her life behind and start over on a clean slate. Despite her secret job, Kirsty maintained close ties with her family. Her parents saw her as responsible and goal-oriented, completely unaware of the real source of her financial independence. Kirsty continued to create the illusion of a stable and ordinary life, holding on to the hope that one day she could leave her double life behind and pursue her youthful dreams of normality and stability. Paul Gravitt was born in 1983 in South Wales. His childhood was marked by constant conflicts and financial instability. His parents frequently argued, often neglecting their son, which left Paul with a sense of being unwanted from an early age. Paul displayed troubling behavior, clashing with teachers and peers, and skipping school regularly. His academic performance was poor, and his parents' attempts to discipline him proved unsuccessful. By his teenage years, Paul began showing a tendency toward aggressive behavior. He was frequently involved in fights and was openly disrespectful toward teachers. His reputation at school worsened until he eventually dropped out, leaving his education incomplete. Around this time, Paul developed an interest in prohibited substances. What began as experimentation with mild substances escalated over time to more severe addictions, which intensified his aggression and isolation. At 18, Paul started working in escort services, seeking funds for his habits. He offered his services to both women and men. This line of work became his primary income source, but came with significant risks. Paul faced threats, aggression, and humiliation, fueling his anger and sense of injustice. This path also drew him into the criminal world, where he formed connections that enabled his destructive lifestyle to continue. Paul's behavior became increasingly hostile. One notable incident involved a dispute with a neighbor whom he accused of damaging his car. Paul not only threatened the woman, but also attacked her with a bat, forcing her to leave the neighborhood. Such incidents were not uncommon, and many people in his community avoided interacting with him. By the time Paul met Kirsty in 2004, He was living an isolated and chaotic life. Escort work, dependency on prohibited substances, and a proclivity for aggression had become central to his existence. His issues with anger management and manipulative tendencies often caused harm to those around him. When Kirsty met Paul, she couldn't foresee how his troubled past would lead to tragic consequences in her own life. In 2004, Kirsty Wilkinson and Paul Gravitt crossed paths at a party held in one of Bridgen's nightclubs. Kirsty was 20 years old and Paul was 21. Both were at challenging points in their lives. Kirsty continued working at an establishment she kept secret from her family, while Paul was deeply entrenched in substance dependency and survived on irregular income from escort services. Despite their differences, a connection developed between them, initially based on mutual attraction. Their first meeting was purely coincidental. The party was loud, and mutual friends introduced them to one another. Kirsty was drawn to Paul's confidence, while he was captivated by her appearance and charming smile. They spent the evening together, but it didn't lead to any serious commitments. After that night, they kept in touch occasionally, but didn't maintain a close relationship. For Kirsty, it was just a fleeting moment in her life with no promise of significant changes. Their connection rekindled at the end of 2007, 3 years after their initial encounter, under unusual circumstances. Paul, as a client, happened to visit the same establishment where Kirsty worked. She was using her pseudonym Megan, but Paul recognized her and approached her for a conversation. Their initial exchange was awkward, but it soon turned into a friendly chat. Paul mentioned that he had often thought about her since their first meeting and suggested they see each other outside of work. From that point, their relationship began to develop rapidly. They started spending more time together, going for walks, and sharing personal stories. Kirsty, who had kept her professional life hidden from those close to her, found in Paul someone who seemed to understand and accept her without judgment. Paul, in turn, displayed confidence and charm, masking the troubled aspects of his past. Kirsty quickly started believing that Paul could be her prince, someone who would help her turn her life around. She was impressed by his talk of wanting to change his life and settle down to start a family. The understanding she thought they shared gave her hope that her life could improve. Paul skillfully fed into this romantic fantasy, often boasting about his alleged achievements, including past jobs as a mechanic, a race car driver, and even a dancer. However, despite the outward appearance of harmony, their relationship was built on half-truths from the start. Paul knew about Kirsty's profession but kept his true motives hidden. To him, she represented not just a romantic interest, but also a potential financial safety net. Kirsty, on the other hand, trusted in the sincerity of their bond and began to confide in Paul more than she had in anyone else. In December 2007, just weeks after reconnecting with Paul, Kirsty surprised her mother, Catherine, by announcing her engagement. According to Kirsty, Paul had proposed, and she had accepted without hesitation. Kirsty believed she had found the man of her dreams, someone who would embrace her for who she was despite her secret life. The news came as a complete shock to her family, as none of them were even aware of Paul's existence. Catherine immediately expressed her concerns. She felt the relationship was moving too quickly and that Kirsty didn't know Paul well enough. She urged her daughter to delay the wedding to allow more time to understand Paul's character and intentions. Catherine suggested postponing the ceremony for at least a few months, but Kirsty was adamant. She and Paul had already chosen a date, February 2008, just 5 weeks after their engagement announcement. The family's first meeting with Paul only heightened their concerns. When Kirsty brought him home, he made a poor impression. Paul appeared disheveled, dressed casually, and interacted with Kirsty's parents with a noticeable lack of respect. His stories about his life raised red flags. He claimed to have worked as a mechanic, a race car driver, and even a dancer, but none of these claims could be substantiated. It seemed as though Paul was trying to impress them by exaggerating his achievements. However, his tone and demeanor left Kirsty's family feeling uneasy. Kirsty's parents, Catherine and David, tried to dissuade her from rushing into the relationship. They pointed out that Paul seemed unreliable and that their relationship was progressing too quickly. Kirsty's older sister, Sonia, also voiced her concerns, remarking that Paul came across as manipulative. Despite their efforts to convince her otherwise, Kirsty firmly believed Paul was her only chance at a happy future. Kirsty had always been a dreamer and a romantic. From a young age, she envisioned a beautiful wedding and a large family. The lifestyle she had been leading left her feeling empty. and she hoped that marrying Paul would mark the beginning of a new chapter. Determined to follow her dream, she ignored all the warnings. She even convinced herself that her loved one simply didn't understand her feelings. Despite their reservations, Kirsty's family chose to support her. On her wedding day, the ceremony took place in February 2008. Her parents and sisters attended, though their smiles masked their unease. Paul, on the other hand, appeared pleased and confident. For Kirsty, it was the day her dreams came true, but for her family, it marked the start of her growing estrangement. They felt she was overlooking the troubling signs that would later lead to tragic consequences. After the wedding in February 2008, Kirsty and Paul began their life together in her apartment in Bridgend. From the outset, Paul imposed his own rules, which quickly escalated into complete control. He moved into Kirsty's home without discussion and immediately took charge of her finances. Paul insisted on gaining access to her bank account, claiming it was necessary to manage their money more effectively. Kirsty, still caught up in her romantic fantasy, didn't object. It soon became evident that Paul had no intention of contributing to their shared well-being. He made no effort to find a job and spent most of his time at home, while Kirsty continued working to support them both. Furthermore, Paul began interfering in her professional life. Instead of discouraging her work, he suggested she take on more clients to increase their income. To him, this was a way to cover their growing expenses, showing no regard for Kirsty's feelings or well-being. Paul's control extended beyond words. He began accompanying Kirsty to her workplace under the guise of ensuring her safety, but in reality, to monitor her schedule and ensure she met his demands. Over time, he started finding new clients for her online. Paul created multiple accounts on various platforms advertising Kirsty's services. As a result, her workload became even more demanding. On top of her shifts at the establishment, she started meeting clients at home. This situation quickly became emotionally devastating for Kirsty. She had long dreamed of leaving her line of work, starting a fresh chapter, and building a family. However, under Paul's pressure, those dreams seemed unattainable. Despite her reluctance to continue, Paul used persuasion and manipulation to convince her that this was the only way to maintain their relationship and financial stability. He exploited her sense of responsibility and love for him as leverage. Paul's control was not limited to finances. He also began interfering in her personal life. He demanded explanations for her every move, checked her phone, and forbade her from speaking with certain friends. He insisted that some of them had a negative influence on their relationship. Gradually, Kirsty became isolated, left without support or anyone to confide in. The early signs of Paul's manipulative behavior included his attempts to undermine Kirsty's confidence. He made comments about her appearance, pointing out perceived flaws, and instilled the belief that she couldn't succeed without him. These remarks chipped away at her self-esteem, making her increasingly dependent on him. Paul also exhibited extreme mood swings, shifting from tenderness and care to irritation and aggression, further deepening Kirsty's sense of insecurity. As time passed, Paul became even more assertive. He began introducing others into their personal life under the pretext of adding variety to their relationship. Kirsty was firmly against this idea, but to avoid conflict, reluctantly agreed. However, such situations only deepened her internal turmoil. She began to feel as though her body and life no longer belonged to her. Kirsty tried to maintain the appearance of a normal family life, but inside, she was consumed by doubt and fear. Paul continued to assert his dominance, completely disregarding her feelings and needs. Certainly, she frequently recorded her thoughts in a journal, but she lacked the strength to stand up against Paul's growing control. Her life had become a constant struggle to hold on to what little independence she had left, all while enduring relentless pressure and manipulation from Paul. Over time, Paul's controlling behavior escalated into overt aggression. The first instances of physical confrontations occurred a few months after the wedding. One evening, Paul, upset that Kirsty hadn't earned what he considered enough money, started an argument that turned into shoving and striking her. For Kirsty, it was a shocking experience, but Paul quickly apologized, promising it would never happen again. However, his apologies were merely temporary. Soon these episodes became regular, and the severity increased. Paul began using aggression as a tool to break Kirsty's will. When she refused to comply with his demands, he would escalate from threats to physical actions. One such instance occurred when Kirsty attempted to discuss her desire to leave her job at the establishment. Paul rudely interrupted her, called her ungrateful, and struck her. Afterward, he tightened his control further, restricting her ability to make decisions independently. Kirsty's mother, Catherine, began suspecting that her daughter was unhappy in her marriage. She tried to have an open conversation with her, but Kirsty either avoided the topic or diverted the discussion. Sensing danger, Catherine warned her that Paul could pose a serious threat to her safety. However, Kirsty dismissed these concerns, convinced that she could change the situation with patience. Kirsty's inner doubts grew, but she clung to the hope that things might improve. Her diary entries revealed that she recognized the toxic nature of her marriage, but couldn't muster the strength to leave. Fear of the unknown, feelings of guilt, and her psychological dependence on Paul kept her trapped in a relationship that was steadily eroding her sense of self. On March 28, 2009, Kirsty and Paul decided to spend the evening with friends at a nightclub in Swansea. Throughout the night, they consumed alcohol and other substances, which was not unusual for them. According to witnesses, there were moments of tension between the couple, leading to periodic arguments. Paul appeared irritable, while Kirsty seemed to be avoiding conflict. The night culminated in a heated argument close to midnight, after which Paul left the party and went home alone, leaving Kirsty with their friends. Not wanting to follow him immediately, Kirsty decided to stay and finish the evening with her friends. They later described her as appearing tired and downcast, but trying not to show her emotions. Late that night, Kirsty called a cab to take her home. The taxi driver later stated that he dropped her off at the house, where she confidently walked inside. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. The following day, Paul told Kirsty's mother, Catherine, that his wife had left early that morning, supposedly taking some belongings and cash. He claimed he hadn't heard anything because he was asleep. Paul also suggested that Kirsty might have gone to see another man. Catherine found his story suspicious. Since Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and personal items, it was an unusual move for someone planning to start a new life. Another suspicious detail came to light when it was revealed that Kirsty had attempted to call emergency services during the night, but the call was disconnected due to a poor signal. Police later discovered that, around the time Kirsty allegedly left, neighbors reported hearing muffled screams and sounds of a struggle. These facts, combined with the lack of any evidence suggesting she left voluntarily, led her family and investigators to suspect foul play. After Kirsty was reported missing, the police immediately launched an investigation. The primary suspect was her husband, Paul Grabbett, as his behavior had raised concerns from the start. Paul claimed he had been asleep during the night and noticed the next morning that Kirsty had taken a few belongings and left. However, his version of events didn't align with the facts. Kirsty had left behind her bank card and other important personal items, which contradicted the idea that she had left intentionally. During the initial search of their home, police noticed some suspicious changes. Part of the living room ceiling had been freshly painted, and a carpet that used to be in the room was missing. Paul explained this by saying Kirsty had wanted to redecorate, but the explanation seemed implausible. Neighbors reported hearing muffled cries, sounds of a struggle, and noise resembling the movement of a heavy object during the night. No one contacted the authorities at the time, assuming it was just a domestic argument. A crucial clue came from Kirsty's failed attempt to call emergency services on the night she disappeared. The call was interrupted, but the fact that she tried to reach out for help suggested she was in danger. This, combined with the neighbors' testimonies, further heightened suspicions about Paul's involvement. On April 6, 2009, the investigation took a tragic turn. A truck driver, who had pulled over on the shoulder of the A48 near Bridgend, noticed a suitcase lying in a roadside ditch. The unusual appearance of the item caught his attention. Upon opening the suitcase, he discovered a human hand. Horrified, he immediately contacted the police. When officers arrived, they found the body of a woman inside the suitcase. Experts later identified the victim as Kirsty Wilkinson. An examination of the body revealed that Kirsty had suffered severe injuries. Her nose and jaw were broken, and her body showed numerous bruises and scratches. She died from a traumatic brain injury caused by repeated blows to the head. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation, indicating an attempt to asphyxiate her during the altercation. Investigators determined that her body had been moved from another location before being left in the ditch. On the same day, police arrested Paul. During interrogations, he denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of Kirsty's whereabouts after she left. However, his nervous demeanor raised further suspicion. Investigators also discovered that the day after Kirsty's disappearance, Paul used her bank card to withdraw money and visited a massage parlor, actions that appeared highly suspicious under the circumstances. Testimonies and forensic evidence revealed the tragic timeline of the crime. On the night of Kirsty's disappearance, an argument broke out between her and Paul. Paul attacked her, striking her multiple times and attempting to strangle her. After Kirsty's death, Paul moved her body to the living room, where he tried to fit it into a suitcase, facing difficulties due to the size of her body. Paul initially considered dismembering it, but abandoned the idea, lacking the necessary tools. Ultimately, he managed to force her body into the suitcase and transported it to a roadside ditch where he disposed of it. Later, traces of blood were found in Kirsty's home, which Paul had unsuccessfully tried to clean. Paint stains on the ceiling were discovered covering splatter marks. These pieces of evidence, combined with witness accounts and Paul's behavior, became crucial in proving his guilt. Kirsty's diary entries further revealed her fear of Paul and her desire to leave, reinforcing the accusations against him. The trial of Paul Grabbit began in early 2010. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline of events based on evidence collected by police and witness statements. Key pieces of evidence included the bloodstains in the living room, which Paul attempted to conceal by repainting the ceiling and removing the carpet. Forensic experts confirmed the blood matched Kirsty's and indicated a violent confrontation. Injuries on her body showed signs of severe aggression. Witnesses, including neighbors, reported hearing sounds of a struggle and muffled cries from the house on the night Kirsty disappeared. A taxi driver confirmed he dropped Kirsty off at her home shortly before her death. Police presented records of Kirsty's call to emergency services that failed due to a poor signal, indicating she had tried to seek help. Another critical piece of evidence was Paul's use of Kirsty's bank card for transactions, including withdrawing money and visiting a massage parlor after her death. During the trial, Kirsty's diary entries were read aloud. In them, she described her fear of Paul, his manipulative behavior, and his aggression. These records painted a picture of a life filled with control, intimidation, and financial exploitation. Prosecutors emphasized how Paul dominated Kirsty's life, disregarding her safety and well-being. Paul denied any wrongdoing, claiming Kirsty left their home voluntarily and suggesting her death was caused by an unknown person. However, his account was contradicted by evidence and witness statements. Investigators also uncovered that Paul had attempted to craft an image of a carefree husband, telling others that Kirsty had run off with another man. After a lengthy trial, the jury found Paul guilty of committing the crime. The judge highlighted the exceptional cruelty of the act, its selfish motives, and Paul's complete lack of remorse. On February 4, 2010, Paul Grabbit was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. While the sentence brought some relief to Kirsty's family, it could not undo their devastating loss. The trial revealed details about Kirsty's life that her family had never known. They were overwhelmed with grief and guilt, believing they could have prevented the tragedy. For them, the proceedings were not only the conclusion of the case, but also a painful reminder of the devastating impact of toxic relationships and control. After Kirsty's death, the Wilkinson family was left deeply scarred, both emotionally and psychologically. Her mother, Catherine, struggled with a constant sense of guilt. She replayed in her mind all the warnings she had given Kirsty, the words her daughter had ignored, and her gut feeling that Paul was a danger to her. These thoughts consumed her, amplifying the pain of the loss. Kirsty's father, David, withdrew into himself, avoiding any discussions about the tragedy. Losing their youngest daughter shattered the unity of their family.